All right, today we're going to be learning about primary elections and caucuses. This is all a part of the political party's nomination process. And if you guys remember from the past couple of days, we know that the main purpose of a political party is to win elections, and the way that they do, or that's the main way they influence government, is by winning elections. So one of the things that they do is they work to nominate or select the best candidate possible to win that in-game general election that they're vying for every 2 years. So our lesson objective today, the essential question, which is in the yellow box here below, how do political parties nominate candidates for the general election? We're trying to figure out the nomination process, how it works. And you guys, by the end of this presentation, should be able to differentiate between a primary election and a caucus. But first, let's look at the timeline, which is right here. Basically, the election process. This graph right here shows us at every 2 years what happens. Really, this graph is showing us every 4 years because of this addition in August. So what I'm going to do is tell you that this starts, and I'll type some things up here for you guys. We can hopefully understand this a little bit better. Yep. In January of June, so we're going to imagine this is January of 2014. So we're going to make that this year. In January 2014, we have the possibility that states start to run their primary process. Well, what is the primary process? What's happening January through June? So it's something called a primary and a caucus. That's what's going on. These are nomination elections. They start as early in January during presidential election years only. And hopefully we know that presidential election years happen every 4 years. So the primaries and the caucuses happen, we'll just say generally over the summer or through the spring and the summer of an even-numbered year. So we're starting in January, but really we'll get going in a non-presidential election year. We'll get going as late as May or June for most states. When we elect a president, though, it's a super big deal. So we push it back up, or we push it way up early, and states start their nomination process in January. On a presidential election year only, this is every 4 years, the next thing that happens is the national government holds its national, or not the national government, excuse me, that's incorrect. The political parties, the national political parties hold a national convention. That is only on presidential election years. So in January 2014, this guy goes away, and we're going to skip that step. But in 2016, we would bring that step back. This is all getting ready for the final prize, which is November of the same year. So November of 2014 is when we have general elections. A general election is when you are finding the final winner of the election. And the final winner of the election is the person that will be in government office. So that's the actual person that's going in government office. If you win a primary caucus, that just means you are one step closer to being able to run in the general election. So let's go on to the next slide. Make sure we understand that the nomination process is just the official endorsement. The word here, endorsement, just means support from support. So when a political party is supporting a candidate, they're saying they've won our nomination, meaning we want them to represent us in that November general election. There's different types of strategies that go involved into elections, but we want to make sure we understand there's 2 different types of campaigning that happens because we have 2 different types of elections. The first is the nomination campaign. That's the January through June. That's the summertime when the political parties are picking who they select. And the next one is the general election. And that's the campaign getting ready for that final end-all result election. You should be able to think about, about when, a good question for checking for understanding right now is thinking, when do candidates start to prepare their campaigns for the general election? They really probably wouldn't start, and I'll give you guys a pause for a second so you can think about that. When does that general election campaign process begin? Begins around August, September. So they're really only focusing on that final election in August and September. Prior to that, they're just trying to convince their party members that they're the right person for the job. And that's that nomination process up here. The National Convention, which happens every 4 years, it only happens on presidential election years. What it is it's a meeting of national party delegates. Let me scooch this up a little bit. And the national party delegates, meaning these are actually people that represent the parties, the party members from every state. Every 4 years they get together, they announce their party platform, which is the goals that political party has for the president coming up and the goals they have for the election year coming up. What kind of policies that political party wants to try to help get passed if you elect that party into the government. But really the purpose of the National Convention, which is why it happens only every 5 years or every 4 years, excuse me, is to announce the actual presidential candidate and vice presidential candidate. Historically, the National Convention is actually where in August the political parties would nominate, and they would get together their party leaders and they would select their candidate for the presidential election. However, today, it doesn't quite work that way because we don't just let the party leaders nominate candidates. Rather, we as a group of people in the population have the option of doing that ourselves. So we all get a chance to participate, whereas a long time ago, it was just the party leaders meeting in August. So historically, if we go back to this chart, and we can make, where's the little screen shade. Here we go. So if we take this guy right here, historically, we would cut out that beginning part, and really the only thing that happened, this is really leading up to the 1970s, was just the announcement of the presidential candidate, the nominee, and then them getting ready for the election. But today, we add in all the people into this primary process. So now we have to figure out is how do those primaries work? First of all, the nomination game, just winning one primary, one election, doesn't mean you're nominated. Because what states do is they hold their elections. If it's January, maybe you guys were wondering, and I can go back to this slide for a second. Maybe y'all are wondering, what in the world, January through June, why is it taking so long? Because states hold their own nomination contest. Each state goes one at a time, and people in each state have the option one at a time of nominating their candidates. For the presidential election, what all the states do matters, but sometimes it might just be a statewide election or even a local election. So it doesn't always mean just for the president. This is for anybody involved in getting elected to our government. So going back here, the whole goal is to win enough. If you're running for president only, this is really a presidential campaign slide right here. The whole goal is to get enough people at that national convention, enough delegates at the national convention. There's the convention right here, the national convention, to nominate you. And so if you win enough votes in the nomination elections, eventually you'll get enough people to come and support you at the national convention. And that's how you actually get elected by your political party to represent them in the general election. So what presidential candidates are doing is they are running just to convince people in every state to send enough delegates for them to go and cast a vote at the national convention for their party member. And just remember, historically, the people weren't really involved. Rather, every state just sent delegates and they picked the presidential candidate. But today, we have our people involved. There's two different ways that we nominate, that states can run that nomination election. One is something called a caucus, which is right here. Make sure we understand that word. This right here is a caucus. This is one way of the states choosing who represents their political party in that state for an election. So a caucus is a meeting of people, a meeting of party leaders, or just people in general to select delegates to the national convention. So, and I have a diagram I can show you guys in just a second, but basically people get together, they meet, they discuss, and eventually they vote on the candidate that they like the best. If enough people vote for one candidate, then they'll get the nomination from that state, and ideally for the whole national party. The first caucus that happens is in Iowa, right here. And let's look at that diagram now so we can understand this caucus a little bit better. So what you see here is the different meetings that are held. Imagine this is a Savannah caucus. And in Savannah, we have different neighborhoods, right? We'll call this neighborhood Tybee. We'll call this neighborhood Wilmington Island. We'll call this neighborhood Pooler. Oops, not Pooler. Pooler. We'll call this neighborhood Historic Downtown. And we'll call this neighborhood One more neighborhood in Savannah, Thunderbolt. So put all these neighborhoods get together, they hold their meeting, they discuss their candidate preference, and each meeting votes. And there's a winner from each local precinct meeting, and each winner gets together, and they put those meetings together to get the final winner for that state. And that's how the caucus works. It's a bunch of different meetings held around the state, and then all the votes of those meetings are put together to calculate the final vote winner.